This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Today we have an electric dryer, Kenmore, actually made by Whirlpool. But when you press start, nothing happens, and it's probably due to some of the thermal switches on the back have blown, probably got overheated at some point. So we try different settings on the dial, we press start, nothing's happening, making sure the door is closed. So we're going to unplug it, pull it out, and do a little investigation, and we'll be able to get this working again. So coming in from the back, we're just going to remove this back panel by removing all of these 1/4 inch screws. There's I think there's 10 or 12 of them around the perimeter. And once you remove them, that whole panel can come off, and you'll be able to get to the little thermal fuses that sometimes they blow if the vent tube is obstructed. Pretty common. With this one, the machine, even when it was turned off, still felt hot, and that usually means the heater element is stuck. Some of the spring part, the coil, has come in contact with the frame, and it's grounded or basically in the on position all the time. So this is the new one. We're doing a continuity test. Testing between the terminal and the metal frame. You should not get any response. Going from terminal to terminal, you should. There'll be continuity. But if you go from the terminal to the metal frame and you have continuity, that means that the spring coil is touching the metal frame, and that is bad because that'll mean the heater is always on. Was the case with this one. So I'm just going terminal to terminal, I get a response, but terminal to frame, nothing. And that's correct. This one's the brand new one. So these are actually pretty easy to pop in. Only bad thing is that it got so hot it burned and popped a couple of the thermal fuses, so I got to replace those too. So I just got to pull off these terminals. Might want to take a picture of these wires where they go before you remove them. And then to get off this element can, this little metal box, there's just 2 1/4 inch screws we have to remove. It comes right out. It's pretty easy repair. So we got 2 of the wires off. The third one I'm going to take off once I get the element removed from the machine. So we're going to just remove these 2 1/4 inch screws that are on the side. One here on the left, one on the right, and then we'll just pull the element down and out away from the machine. There we go. So this is the old one. And looking at it, I did notice that the spring coil was touching the frame. I think it got so hot it kind of warped itself up and made contact. And then once that happens, it just stays in the on position all the time. And that's why the thermal fuse is blue. So to get off this last one, you could use needle nose pliers to pry it off of the terminal, or you could put a standard head screwdriver underneath it and kind of pry it up. Some of these are pretty hard to get off. So we're just going to use a standard head screwdriver and pry it off. There we go. We're going to put that same one on the new element. This little thermal fuse or thermal switch is okay. I tested it. It does have continuity. So that one didn't blow. So I'm going to reuse that one. Just testing again, going from terminal to terminal, you get a response, but from terminal to frame, no response. That's good. So this part of the element looks good on the old one. On the other side, though, you notice the bottom spring bent up for some reason and made contact with the metal frame. And that thing will just keep heating constantly, and it'll pop all the thermal fuses because the machine gets too hot. It's more likely, though, that your element is okay and your thermal fuse blew because the vent tube is obstructed with just accumulated lint. That's much more common. These elements usually are okay. But once you have the back off, it is good to test it by putting your multi-tester, one on the terminal and one on the frame like we do here. And then you can tell if you get a continuity reading, that means that that element does need to be replaced. So we're going to put the new one in. We're just going to tilt the top part in and push up till the little holes line up, and we'll put in those 2/4 inch screws. There we go. We can put the wires back on the terminals. And that's all we really need to do if it was just a bad element. But because this thing got so hot, it did pop a couple of the other thermal fuses on the machine. So I got to replace those two while I got it open. Here's the little kit. This one comes with a thermal fuse and a thermostat. So this upper thermal fuse high up on the ducting needs to be replaced. So I'll pull off the two wires and I'll remove 1/4 inch screw. And then the other side is just held in by a little metal tab. New one in. By the way, sometimes you can reset these thermal fuses, not always, but sometimes by just smashing the flat part down against concrete or brick, some hard object. Sometimes it'll reset. It's better to replace it, but if you're in a pinch and you got to get the machine going, sometimes that will work as a reset, about 80% of the time. We get the screw back in, we'll get the wires back on, and then we have one other thermal switch we got to do. And this is on the fan ducting. This is the most common one that will blow when your ducting is obstructed. This is a very common failure for these dryers. These are the Series 80 Series 80 electric dryers and gas dryers are very similar. This part will often pop when it gets too hot. The reason it gets too hot is the dryer can't get rid of its heat through the vent tube as readily as it should. Often happens on vent tubes that are too long, like 20-30 feet long, or ones that go up vertically. I was just looking at the old canister again. So we got that new thermal fuse on. We're going to put on the back real quick, put those perimeter screws back in. And then we'll do one more thing, and that's to go out and use a vent cleaning brush to clean out some of the lint that kind of accumulates in the vent tube. It's kind of like in our arteries with arterial sclerosis, that plaque builds up over time. with a dryer, same thing happens. And now and then, if you have a brush, you go out there and clean it, and then the dryer works really good. It dries much faster, and you won't end up blowing any fuses or thermal switches. And the brush I use hooks up to my drill, and it's made by a company called Lint Eater, linteater.com, and you get about 12 feet worth. So I'm just going to plug it back in and then set it and then see if it's going to work. So it starts right back up, so that cured our problem. One other thing that you could check with an electric dryer also is that both breakers at the breaker box that are dedicated to the dryer are in the full on position. If one trips, it won't work. So here's my vent tube brushes. I'm on the outside of the house. It's kind of a long run for this. It was about 20 feet. So I'm going to use these 3-foot sections. I can increase it 3 feet at a time. And I'm going to hook it to my drill, go in there. I got to make sure my drill's always turning clockwise. If it turns there's a bunch of lint that comes out. If it turns counterclockwise, it can undo itself inside the vent tube, which you do not want. So make sure you're always turning it to your right or clockwise. So I added another 3 feet. I go in there, I run it back and forth to just break up all that lint. And then I'm going to keep adding these 3-foot sections. So if you have a vent tube that goes up through your roof, I would do this probably every 6 months. If you have a short vent tube that's only like 2 or 3 feet, maybe you would never have to do it. If it's a long vent tube, like 20 or 30 feet, I would do it every 6 months. And your dryer will run a lot better and won't pop any fuses. So thanks so much for watching our video. I hope this helps you, and please subscribe when you get a chance. Thanks a lot.